Welcome back, fellow football fanatics, to Touchdown Talk, episode 20. I'm very excited to get started, especially after what has been, well, quite frankly, a crazy first 3 weeks. You know what was really shocking to me in week 3? Seeing Arkansas the prior week, I know they blew it to Oklahoma State, but they were up big time on the Cowboys in the first half. And then they choked it away and lost. And then the following week, this past Saturday, well, they were in a fight, a phone booth fight with UAB. It shocked me this weekend that Billy Napier wasn't fired. I guess it's because he's tied directly to Scott Strickland's ankle, so maybe they're a package deal, but the boosters reportedly came up with the money, and they haven't made a move yet. And that I am very surprised by. Some other things that surprised me were the fact that Michigan was able to run for 300 yards and not cover the spread. The fact that Georgia was game controlled by Kentucky. Yes, they escaped with a win because they have infinitely better skill position players and more talent, but Kentucky literally game controlled them. Like, let me show you all what Kentucky did to Georgia. Kentucky scored 12 points, kicked 4 field goals, held Georgia to 13 points, and Georgia didn't even have the ball for 30 minutes. They didn't even have the ball for 25 minutes. Kentucky had a 10-minute possession advantage. They outgained Georgia by 22 yards, had 11 more first downs. If not for the fact that Georgia won the turnover battle, Kentucky would have won the game. And even factoring that in, Kentucky should have won the game. They were 9 of 16 on third down, over 50%. Georgia was 5 of 13 on third down. Kentucky had the superior rushing attack, 170 yards rushing, 3.8 yards per carry, compared to Georgia's 102 yards rushing on 3.4 yards per carry. And Kentucky also won the penalty battle, having 5 fewer penalties and, wow, that's kind of shocking, 62 fewer penalty yards. Brock Vandagriff, for parts of this game, outplayed Carson Beck. It was unreal. And week 3 as a whole was pretty crazy. But before we get into episode 20 and we dive into all of these things, I encourage you to like the video, to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell. I know that many of you probably think you're subscribed, but it's always good to double check. Just make sure you're subscribed. Be active in the live chat. We will get to super chats at the end, as is customary. And I also want to thank Chris Gates Fitness for sponsoring us. As I said last week, he is a fitness expert. He is a trainer, and he has quite a, I would say, lucrative, efficient, and helpful business going on, where he helps you attain your fitness goals while also enjoying the football season. You know, I'm a guy who loves to eat burgers. I love eating hot dogs. Mustard doesn't have any calories, but most condiments do have calories, and I'm a condiments guy. Mustard, mayo, not exactly a fan of ketchup, but I like things with flavor. I like my big, juicy burger that I'm envisioning myself holding, and with an egg and bacon and mustard and mayo and cheese upon cheese and a nice buttery bun, and I like to dig into that thing and consume it. And I like to eat pizza too. I love pizza. I love French fries. I love my calorically dense Chinese food from a few blocks down. It's one of the best places ever. China House in Pinckney, Michigan. If you ever go through Pinckney in Michigan, check out China House. It's really good stuff. You can do that. You can eat that type of food and still gain muscle and lose fat. And basically what I'm saying is, translating from fitness jargon to English, is you can enjoy yourself and have fun and not be miserable while achieving your fitness goals. And Chris Gates will help you do that. He has not live, but pre-recorded question and answer sessions that he updates. He has 2 and 4 and 3 day fitness regimens. He has a ton of different training programs, workout videos that tell you how you should be doing things the right way. We all know that there are people when we go to the gym sometimes who mock us when we're learning, and all we're trying to do is learn how to be better and how to better our bodies, which will not just help us, but can help those around us. There's no shame in learning, none whatsoever. And Chris Gates will help you learn. It's nice to know, it's critical, especially as you begin to add weight and reach to your goals. It's critical to know how to do things the proper way. You always start out with form, and then you move on up. And Chris Gates is an expert in his field. He's a Pitt Panthers fan. He's very happy about the backyard brawl where Eli Holstein showed that he could play, proved the past Bama staff wrong, and I could probably do a video on the fact that Neil Brown's on the hot seat now, because Neil Brown is Neil Brown. Never stop being Neil Brown. And it's the same thing for Pat Narduzzi. Don't stop being yourself, Pat Narduzzi, saying that we beat West Virginia and we beat the refs. Absolute classic. Check out chrisgatesfitness.com/collegefootballwithsam / and you will get an 80% discount. 80% discount on a $50 a month membership. Get your fitness journey started today, or upgrade your fitness membership. Like you're a school and a talented football roster, and you can do a lot, but you need some extra help. So you need a coach, a high-level coach, head coach, to come in and give you instruction. That's what Chris Gates Fitness can and will be to you. So sign up again, chrisgatesfitness.com/collegefootballwithsam /. You see it up on the screen right now, and it's also in the pinned comment in the live chat, and it will be in a pinned comment in the comment section after this stream is over. Thank you very much. Okay, so now I want to get into a little bit of week 4. And again, keep the live chat active, ask questions, put in super chats, as super chats are going to be the questions that I answer first are going to be those. And how are you guys doing, by the way? It seems like we have a lot of different people from all across the country right now in this chat. And as someone said, our Sam has been bought by foodies. I haven't been bought by anyone. I've tried Chris's workouts, and they're time efficient, and they're pretty darn good. So I only advocate for what I think is going to be successful, for what I think has integrity. That's all I advocate for. I mean, there have been a plethora, I will tell you, a plethora of sports betting companies that have reached out to me that I have said no to. Because the only sports betting that I want you guys involved in or myself involved in is something that I know can make you money. Not just something that will say you can make money if you make the right decision, and then they pop up a bunch of ads everywhere and deceive you. I want something that's proven if I'm going to bet my own money on something. If you're going to be betting, you want to know what you're doing so that you can make money and almost use it as like a high-risk investment rather than an addiction. And I don't want to, spread any gambling addiction or anything like that. I don't want to be a part of it. So integrity here on College Football with Sam is top priority. It's why I admit when I'm wrong, because integrity matters. All right, well, let's get down to business, and I want to spend a bit of my time giving some preview and predictions for these upcoming games. Tennessee versus Oklahoma, Utah versus Oklahoma State, Michigan State versus Boston College, and Iowa versus Minnesota. There is a ton of football this weekend. This week's slate is much more exciting, I think, than week 3's, but let's just get down to business. And in between the previews that I do, you'll have a chance to answer questions. And people who are listening to this, when it's not a live stream, they'll have a chance to see what you have to say. So send in the super chats, send in the likes, the subscriptions, share this stream around. Let's get down to business. And we kick that off with my Big Ten power rankings here. My 2024, well, that doesn't sound right. Through 3 weeks in the Big Ten, who do you think are the best teams? I can tell you what I think the hierarchy is in the Big Ten through 3 weeks in. Ohio State is clearly number 1 in the Big Ten. But who's number 2? Who's number 3? I mean, who is in that tier below Ohio State, and what does the rest of the Big Ten look like? I have Penn State at number 2, behind Ohio State, and I have Oregon following them closely behind at number 3, Michigan at 4, Nebraska at 5, Rutgers at 6, USC at 7, Iowa at 8. About Michigan through Iowa, so Michigan, Nebraska, Rutgers, USC, and Iowa, those teams I'd all put in a similar camp. USC probably has the highest ceiling out of all of those teams, but they've also only played 2 games, and I don't know how physical they are in the trenches. I would say every team in their tier, USC's, is more physical than they are, but USC has far better quarterback play, wide receiver play, and on average a more talented roster than anyone surrounding them in what I would call, honestly, tier 3. Penn State and Oregon, I think, are in a very clear tier 2. I think it's Ohio State, and maybe Oregon and Penn State can compete with Ohio State depending on how they manage their roster and how they play, and, Penn State versus Ohio State and Oregon versus Ohio State. Those 3 games, I think, will decide the conference. Michigan versus, Oregon, Michigan versus Ohio State, and Michigan versus USC. Michigan is going to be this team that at best could sneak into the college football playoff. I don't think they're a factor right now in winning the Big Ten. They could be a factor in deciding who reaches Indianapolis. Maybe they beat Oregon after Ohio State already beat the Ducks and they kick Oregon out of the conference championship race. I don't know, but I can't see Michigan winning the Big Ten. The only teams I can see winning the Big Ten at this point are Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State. That's the top 3, I think the clear top 3, and I think Ohio State's clearly number 1. You look at what they did to Western Michigan and what they did to Akron in the second half, and compare their 8 quarters of play to the Big Ten's 8 or 12 quarters of play, depending on the team and whether they had a bye in week 3 or not. Well, I would be pretty hard-pressed to say that anyone other than maybe, just maybe Penn State or Oregon is better than them. And I think they're number 1. I think it's fairly obvious. You look at going back to tier 3, I'm bouncing all around the place, but I don't know how you don't do that when looking at power ratings, especially this early, because, well, we have a small sample size. So there's an argument for Illinois to be higher than 11th, or for USC to be 4th, or for Nebraska to be 4th. I mean, I think there's an argument for Iowa being higher than 8th, even though they already do have a loss and their defense has some questions. I just think that tier 1, it's Ohio State. Tier 2, it's Penn State and Oregon. Michigan, Nebraska, Rutgers, USC, and Iowa. That makes up tier 3. Michigan State, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Maryland make up tier 4. Washington's in kind of a weird spot. I feel like they make up like tier 4B or tier 5. I don't feel like anyone is in Washington's tier. Like they don't fit in the Big Ten. They clearly have a lot of work to do, but they're way better than Purdue, Northwestern, and UCLA, who make up tier bottom feeder, also known as, well, tier 5. 3 is the most interesting tier to me, because teams in tier 3, all of them can build strong momentum for 2025, outside of maybe Iowa because of how senior-laden they are. For Rutgers, they have enough recruiting and enough of, well, a staff that doesn't include Kirk Ferentz. That I'm saying that because Kirk Ferentz could retire after this year. Greg Schiano is probably going to be at Rutgers for a while. So Iowa's kind of that weird team inside of tier 3, but USC, Rutgers, Nebraska, and Michigan, depending on how they finish this season, we could be looking at them in a negative light or just a mediocre light. like kind of not looking at them at all, just neutral, entering 2025. Some, like Michigan and USC, and maybe Nebraska, with Rutgers, with how easy their schedule is and how much they brought back, I find it to be hard pressed that anyone would look at Rutgers in a negative light unless they went 5-7, which I don't think will happen. But these teams have high ceilings and low floors, and we could be talking about Michigan potentially winning the Big Ten again in 2025, depending on how they finish out this year. Or we could talk about, Sharon Moore's going to get fired soon. It's a question of when rather than if. For Lincoln Riley, it could literally be the same thing. College football playoff and Big Ten title contender next year, or maybe Riley's on the hot seat. For Nebraska, I don't think it's as extreme on the low end. I don't think Matt Rhule will be on the hot seat in 2025 because they can just go 6-6 or 7-5, and he's improved compared to his previous season. But for Nebraska, you could talk about them being back or being legitimately back and competing for the Big Ten championship and college football playoff next year. For Rutgers, you could be talking about them as a long-term Big Ten sleeper, a long-term dark horse with how well that they're recruiting and clearly how they have developed rather well and I think formed themselves and evolved into being a formidable, classic Big Ten style team. Or if they finish 6-6 or 7-5, maybe it's just, well, they're Rutgers. They'll be competitive, but their schedule completely determines their season. And with Iowa, if the offense continues to improve and the defense shores up some things and they go 10-2, or maybe they compete with Ohio State and Kirk Ferentz returns and Brennan Sullivan looks to take the reins next year, maybe there could be some offensive excitement about Iowa. It's pretty weird. And then for Michigan State and Indiana and Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Maryland, Washington, those are other teams that, depending on how they finish out this season, there could be some optimism or a severe case of pessimism entering 2025. I'm the highest on Michigan State. I'm pretty high on Illinois next year just because of how young they are. Wisconsin, I'm a bit uncertain, but we'll have to see how they finish off this year. Minnesota, I'm pretty uncertain too. I think Loxley long-term at Maryland will be fine. Indiana, I expected them to go bowling this year, but they look a lot better than just a bowl team, especially factoring in the fact their schedule's easy. So, again, we'll have to wait and see with a lot of these teams. Many of them don't even have strength of schedules that are anywhere close to top 25 right now. Big Ten Conference play is going to determine a lot. And speaking of Big Ten Conference play, I have Penn State still going 12-1, 9-0 in conference. I think that Penn State is a team with Andy Kotelnicki that will show up, ironically enough, in big games, at least on offense. They don't have the talent to crush Ohio State, and I don't think they have the coaching to either. Penn State is not going to do it to Ohio State what Michigan did to them in 2021 and 2022. But they still host the Buckeyes. They have, I think, the coordinator edge over the Buckeyes for offensive coordinator, for defensive coordinator that goes Ohio State's way. And Penn State returns a lot of experience, a lot of talent. We've seen Drew Aller and Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen take steps forward this year. The offense looks new and reformed, and I'm not backing off of my Penn State prediction consequentially, even though Ohio State's objectively looked better than them through 3 weeks. But keep in mind, I had Ohio State power rated ahead of Penn State to begin the season, and I still had Penn State beating them and reaching Indy. I have Penn State losing in Indianapolis, though, to a rematch of the Ohio State Buckeyes, who I have winning the Big Ten, going 12-1, 8-1 in Big Ten conference play. I think it's Penn State and Ohio State going to Indianapolis, and I think that Ohio State gets that head-to-head tiebreaker over Oregon and Iowa, who also go 8-1 in conference. Iowa still has, I think, an elite defense. I just think they have some things in the secondary they have to work out. But through these first 3 weeks, Georgia has a really good defense. Michigan's is disappointing. Iowa's is disappointing. Penn State, I think, just had a fluke performance against Bowling Green. Ohio State's looks as advertised. We may have a weaker season, not just overall, but also on defense in the Big Ten, but also in the college football world compared to last year, where Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, and Iowa all had elite defenses, and Clemson was up there too. Iowa, I still have faith in their defense. Their offense has taken steps forward. For Oregon, if they play more like they did against Oregon State for the rest of the year, they could win the Natty, but you got to have more consistency than just one great game. USC, Nebraska, Rutgers, Michigan, Indiana, those are all, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Notice how I have Michigan at 8th in my Big Ten predictions, like projections for the end of the season, but I have them behind Nebraska, Rutgers, and USC. A big part of that is that Rutgers, Nebraska, and USC don't face both Ohio State and Oregon in the regular seasons. They have easier schedules than Michigan does. They also had easier non-conference schedules than Michigan did. And as I said in my USC versus Michigan preview and prediction, I think Michigan is a team with a lot of potential, like very high potential. A elite staff would make Michigan into a top 10 team based off of the talent they have, even with the handicap they have at quarterback. But I don't trust Michigan's staff to utilize said potential. So I think Michigan will play USC extremely competitively and potentially beat them. In fact, I think the odds that Michigan beats USC are quite high. They could do the same to Oregon. Ohio State's a different animal. Yes, it's a rivalry, but I don't think Michigan has a shot to beat Ohio State currently. That's why I have Michigan at 8-4, 6-3, despite having them number 4 in power ratings. You look at Rutgers, Nebraska, and USC. Those are all teams that can contend for the college football playoff due to their schedule, the fact that they all have great coaching staffs, and they have their own non-negotiable. For Nebraska, it's their defensive line, and it's their punishing rushing attack, and potentially Dylan Raiola. You look at Rutgers, it's their punishing rushing attack, their offensive line, and I'd say their defense and special teams. And for USC, it's their receivers, it's their quarterback, and the fact that while their defense is not a top 10 unit, they do have a top 5 defensive coordinator in D'Anton Lynn, who can more than compensate for at least many minutes and quarters of every USC football game the discrepancies that his defense faces compared to others. He can make up for the lack of developed talent due to Alex Grinch, I think in a better way than a lot of defensive coordinators can, both in the Big Ten and nationally. You look at Indiana. Indiana can go 10-2. I have them still going 8-4, but they could go 10-2, and that would be pretty phenomenal in year one with Curt Cignetti, his staff, and much of his roster being made up of transfers. But I think they have the coaching staff, the cohesion, the passion, and also the weapons at wide receiver in particular, and the defense up front to get that done with the schedule they have. And then Michigan State, Wisconsin, Illinois, those are teams that can pretty easily go bowling. Wisconsin, maybe not so easily, but I still like Wisconsin's staff, and I think Alabama is better than any team in Big Ten Conference play for the Badgers. And the Badgers did show that they, while far from perfect against Alabama's defense, they can run the ball, and they do have a receiver that can even get yards after catch against Alabama's defenders, who are significantly bigger and larger and faster and more explosive than Wisconsin's offensive players. So Wisconsin can still go bowling. Michigan State can go 9-3 in my mind. Illinois can go 7-5, maybe 8-4, but I need to see more from their rushing offense, which has looked disappointing so far this year. And Washington, Minnesota, Maryland, Purdue, UCLA, and Northwestern are kind of at the bottom. They're like the chunk of chili. They're like that. I don't know what you call it, that dirty slab at the bottom of the chili pot. So again, for power ratings and also record projections, I have Ohio State at 1 in my power ratings, Penn State at 2, Oregon 3, Michigan 4, Nebraska 5, Rutgers 6, USC 7, Iowa 8, Michigan State 9, Indiana 10, Illinois 11, Wisconsin 12, Minnesota 13, Maryland 14, Washington 15, Purdue 16, Northwestern 17, 18 is UCLA. As for my record projections, I have Penn State going 12-1, 9-0 in conference play, losing to number 2 Ohio State in Indianapolis, who goes 12-1, wins the Big Ten with an 8-1 regular season record. Oregon's at 3, 11-1, 8-1. Iowa's at 4, 10-2, 8-1. USC's at 5, 10-2, 7-2. Nebraska's at 6 and Rutgers is at 7, also with 10-2, 7-2 conference records. Michigan and Indiana are 8-4. Michigan is just at number 8 because of their 6-3 conference record, while Indiana has a 5-4 conference record. Michigan State, number 10, 7-5, 4-5. Wisconsin, 5-7, 3-6. Illinois, 6-6, 3-6. Washington, Minnesota, 4-8, 2-7. Washington just gets the tiebreaker due to the tougher schedule. 13th, Minnesota's 14th. Maryland is 4-8, 1-8 at 15th. Purdue is 2-10, 1-8 at 16th. UCLA is 1-11, 0-9 at 17th. And Northwestern is 2-10, 0-9 at 18th. So those are my Big Ten power ratings and record projections. Again, subject to change. We're only 3 weeks in, about to be 4 weeks in, and I have a feeling that we're going to be learning a lot more in this next week, 2, maybe 3, and when week 7 comes around and we see Oregon versus Ohio State, we're going to be learning a lot in not just that game, but that week as well. So yeah, if you have any questions about that, just feel free to comment, feel free to tell me what you think, and we're going to be moving on here because I don't want to keep you guys until like 10:30. Again, thanks to Chris Gates for sponsoring us, and thank you for being on here. If you have not already, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, click that notification bell, share this video around, and have fun. Because if you're not having fun while watching college football or while watching this channel, well, I don't know exactly what you're doing. I mean, I welcome people who want to disagree with me or who may get, I don't know exactly what the term is, but who may strongly disagree, let's put it that way, with my opinions. I welcome that. But you always want to make sure that you can have fun with college football. It's the best sport in the whole world. And I'm biased when I say that. And we try to be objective on this channel. But when it comes to college football, we're not going to, equally watch soccer or an American football and American basketball and tennis or baseball. No, college football is the best. So let's continue with that trend. And I want to bring you to an interesting game. I want to bring you to Iowa at Minnesota. Iowa is favored by 2.5 points on the road at rival Minnesota this weekend. And this will be a 7:30 p.m. kickoff. 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6:30 p.m. Central Time. Minnesota won 12-10 in 2023. In a game where Iowa led 10-3 at the half, Minnesota outscored the Hawkeyes 9-0 behind Darius Taylor and behind Daniel Jackson and Ethan Kaliakmanis, and they got the benefit of a controversial call where Cooper DeJean gave like a half-effort fair catch signal, and then he took the punt back to the house, and then the ref said, you can't just make a half fair catch symbol or signal and then run it back. You can't do that. So then they called it dead. He fair caught it. And then Deacon Hill and Iowa's offense under Brian Ferentz did what they did best. They lost the football game. And I know that Iowa and Kirk Ferentz, and even though Brian Ferentz is gone, Tim Lester and Phil Parker, LeVar Woods, the special teams coach especially, are circling this game. It is, after all, a rivalry game. A very intense one at that, and PJ Fleck earned his first win in the series last season. Before that, he was winless against Kirk Ferentz and the Hawkeyes. And PJ Fleck had one of his worst years with the Gophers. They went 5-7 in the regular season. The Floyd of Rosedale is special. With an awesome trophy, it was introduced in 1935 Minnesota leads the series 63-52-2, and they're currently on a one-game win streak. But before that one-game win streak, Iowa had won 8 games in a row. The last time these two played in Minneapolis, Minnesota, temperatures were freezing, well below freezing, I do believe. I think the wind chill might have been in the single digits, and Iowa won 13-10 in a game where Minnesota ran all over the Hawkeyes, but turnovers and Spencer Petras leading a clutch drive for the game-winning field goal helped the Hawkeyes to win. Looking at these teams and just quickly doing a broad comparison, Iowa is ranked ahead of Minnesota. They're viewed as the better team per power ratings than Minnesota, which I don't think is that much of a surprise. But what might be a little surprising is when you remember that college football home field advantage is about 3-4 additional points, maybe 5. And I would say for bigger stadiums and more intimidating environments like Beaver Stadium, Ohio Stadium, even 6 or 7 points added to the home team. Well, according to FPI and also S&P Plus, Iowa is barely 3 points better than Minnesota, and per FPI, they're barely 2 points better than Minnesota. So S&P Plus and FPI are telling you that with home field advantage factored in, this is a coin flip game, if not a game where Minnesota is slightly favored to win. But the spread is Iowa minus 2.5. They are laying 2.5 on the road, nonetheless. And I do find that interesting. I think part of it's the fact that Iowa has dominated this rivalry game, and they have quite frankly looked like the better team through 3 weeks. I mean, they should have beaten Iowa State. They were able to put up enough offense against Troy to pull away, even with their struggles on defense. Shut out Illinois State. Minnesota, meanwhile, lost to North Carolina in a game where, like Iowa over Iowa State, they should have won, but their kicker, Dragan Kesic, went 1 of 3 on that day. Against Nevada, their defense earned a shutout, but they only scored 27 points. I look here at the power ratings of these two teams, and I just find it, intriguing, to say the least, especially since they're so close together that this should be a close game. And also the fact that, FPI rates Iowa very low, which I don't necessarily get. Like Iowa, for example, has upgraded their rushing offense, upgraded their offense overall. And it's not like their defense has taken massive steps back. Their secondary's taken some steps back, but their defense is still one of the best in the country. And it looks like Drew Stevens has refound his groove as one of the nation's better kickers. So I do find it intriguing that Iowa, per the spread, is a bigger favorite than they are per power ratings. But maybe that's just me. And you look at points per play margin, and that makes this even more intriguing. Iowa only has a 0.054 points per play margin, which means that their defense and offense are razor thin in the points that the offense forces per play and the points that the defense allows per play. That's not a good sign whatsoever. Minnesota, meanwhile, has been more dominant than Iowa. Points per play margin is a good measurement of dominance. It doesn't factor in strength of schedule like game control does, but Minnesota has scored, well, not scored, they have a 0.217 points per play margin over the Hawkeyes. Or not over the Hawkeyes, but just in general. You know what I mean. And I look at these teams, and it makes sense. Iowa's a team that plays in a lot of close games. Their secondary has given up big passing plays. They've given up 3 passes of, I believe, over 50 yards. Minnesota has given up 0. Maryland gave up 2. I got this from Michigan Podcast and Steve Dace. No other secondaries in the Big Ten have given up a pass of 50 yards or more except for Maryland's and Iowa's. And that's a lot of points per play for, the team who's throwing those balls on Iowa, especially if those plays, like some from Troy and some from Iowa State, mostly result in touchdowns or field goals. So Minnesota has controlled games, I would say, just looking at it subjectively and not really factoring in strength of schedule. I think they've controlled games in a much superior fashion to what Iowa has. Honestly, Iowa has struggled keeping itself ahead of opponents in the way that they want to keep themselves ahead, which is dominating, constricting defense and controlling the clock and running the ball. They've ran the ball very effectively with Caleb Johnson. They've controlled the clock well, but that defense, especially in terms of stopping big plays, has been questionable, particularly at the secondary in the first 3 weeks. We've seen that against Troy. We've seen that against Iowa State, where it really became a soft spot. Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins just tearing up that secondary with Rocco Becht, and that earned Matt Campbell his second win against Iowa in his career with the Cyclones. Iowa has the 103rd best strength of schedule through 3 games. Minnesota has the 117th best strength of schedule through 3 games. Their game controls per ESPN are pretty similar, and that honestly makes sense. But what I meant when I said that Minnesota controls games better than Iowa does is the way that these two teams have settled their identity and have chosen their identity is they want to play good defense, they want to run the football, and they're excited. They get, a boost of energy, a jolt when they have to use their field goal kicker. And right now, based off of how these two teams are playing, that style of football better suits Minnesota than it does Iowa. Again, right now that fits Minnesota better. And it's not by this large margin, but I do think it's noticeable when you put both of these teams under scrutiny. The critical matchup in this game is Iowa's running backs and their offensive line against Minnesota's defensive line and Minnesota's linebackers. You look at Iowa's offensive line and the fact that Caleb Johnson has just been able to get big play after big play on the ground, and you can't help but be impressed by it. And Darius Taylor in Minnesota, meanwhile, they've had some struggles running the football. They aren't even running for 4 yards per carry right now. They aren't. And that includes a matchup against North Carolina where Minnesota did run for over 3 yards per carry. So they have some issues in some of these other games they've played against Rhode Island and against Nevada. And that is disturbing when you're going up against an Iowa defense that is just, look, it's not as secure, particularly at stopping big plays as it was last year, but it's still an awesome defense and one of the best in college football. Meanwhile, you look at Iowa's O-line and their rushing attack versus Minnesota's D-line and their rush defense. That's a matchup that has a lot more wiggle room, and therefore that's why I say it's the critical matchup. I think that Iowa is going to be just fine at being able to limit Minnesota's rushing attack, not stopping it. And there's a way that Minnesota can ground and pound against Iowa, just like they did in 2022. But I think based off of how these rushing offenses have performed in the first 3 weeks and how their defenses have performed, this right here is the matchup to pay attention to. And another matchup that I honestly could have put up here is how does Max Brosmer and Daniel Jackson and Elijah Spencer do against Jermari Harris and do against Quinn Schulte and Xavier Nwapka, and how do they do against TJ Hall and John Nestor and an Iowa secondary that has struggled against big plays and big passes? That could have been a matchup that I maybe should have put up alongside of this at least, but I don't think Brosmer is proven enough yet at quarterback to say that he is going to put up big-time numbers against Iowa's secondary. I think that right here is the matchup to look at. The Iowa rushing offense, and really the offensive line in general, with their running backs against Minnesota's defensive line and their linebacker core. If you don't believe me that Iowa has the vastly superior rushing attack compared to Minnesota, let me show you. Iowa through 3 games has 729 rushing yards. They're averaging well over 200 yards per game. They have 5.9 yards per carry with a long of 64, and they've broken off several long runs. They have 7 rushing touchdowns. Minnesota's rushing attack, they've only rushed for 390 yards on the season. 3.8 yards per carry, 6 rushing touchdowns, and that includes a long of 80 from Darius Taylor, who currently has 25 carries for 188 yards, 7.5 yards per carry. Darius Taylor this season has been active against Nevada, where he had that long of 80, and Rhode Island, where he had a long of 17 and averaged 4.6 yards per carry. He's also had 85 receiving yards and a touchdown, so he's getting involved in the passing game. And then you look at Minnesota allowing 7 sacks, much of them against North Carolina, and Iowa's only allowed 3, despite the fact that they have actually passed more, 84 attempts compared to Minnesota's 82, and they've allowed less sacks. So Iowa has the better offensive line, they have the better rushing attack, and it's up to Minnesota's defensive front to stop them. When you look at this offense, again, Iowa, better offensive line. I think that Minnesota does have the better running backs, though, with Marcus Major, with Say Bangura, with Darius Taylor, compared to Caleb Johnson, Kamari Moulton, and Jason Patterson. It's close. It's closer than I would have expected in the preseason, but I have to give Darius Taylor benefit of the doubt based off of what I saw last year. Bangura, he hasn't even played all that much, just 3 carries, and he was good at Ohio. Jaron Mangum and Jordan Newbin are getting involved, along with Marcus Major, who previously played at Oklahoma. I do think Minnesota has more depth, and I think Darius Taylor is a better RB1 when healthy compared to Caleb Johnson. We'll see if Darius Taylor can remain healthy, but I've seen him get nearly 40 carries in a game and survive it. With Caleb Johnson, it seems like he's been hitting a lot of home run hitters. Still a good running back, but I have to give the edge to Minnesota there. The offensive line is Iowa's right now, and it's not even close, despite the fact that Minnesota has tackle Ariante Irsay, who could be a future, high-level NFL player. I will give Minnesota the edge at quarterback with Max Brosmer, and also wide receiver with Daniel Jackson and Elijah Spencer. Iowa has Luke Lachey, Addison Ostrenga, and Zach Ortworth, and Jacob Gill and Reese Vanderzee have been welcome additions. Vanderzee's a freshman, Gill's an incoming transfer from Northwestern, and they've been the 2 best receivers on the team. Shows you how bad the offense was managed the past few years. But they're not as good as Daniel Jackson, who has 12 receptions for 156 yards, or Elijah Spencer, who has 10 receptions for 134 yards. Iowa is tight end U. In this matchup, at least, Minnesota is wide receiver U, and they've produced some pretty good wide receivers under PJ Fleck. Brosmer has a 147.5 passer rating, completing nearly 70% of his passes for 3 touchdowns and a pick. Cade McNamara has 3 touchdowns and a pick. He's completing about 63% of his passes. He has a 124.2 QBR, or passer rating. His QBR at 31.2 is like at a 2021 Spencer Petras level. So Iowa has better QB than they've had the previous 2 seasons. And really, I would say right now Iowa looks almost like a carbon copy of their 2021 selves, where they had a better offense than in 22 and 23, but also a worse defense. I hope I'm proven wrong, though, because I said Iowa in the preseason would have the nation's #1 defense and it wouldn't be close. It's still possible for that to happen, but there are going to have to be some things that will be fixed in the Hawkeyes' favor. You look at defense, I give Iowa every position on defense, and I know that Minnesota has good defensive players like Devin Eastern, Jalen Logan Redding, Jod Joyner, Justin Wally, Ethan Robinson, Jack Henderson, Maverick Baranowski, and Cody Lindenberg. But Iowa has Jay Higgins, who I think is #2 per Pro Football Focus in terms of rating linebackers. Nick Jackson is an All-American caliber player. Deontay Craig, Aaron Graves, Yaya Black, and Ethan Hurkett make up an awesome defensive line. Kyler Fisher is another player to look out for in that Leo spot, kind of hybrid linebacker defensive line. Sebastian Castro, Xavier Nwapka, and Quinn Schulte make up a great cash and safety room, cash being that special defensive back position at Iowa. Corner is a question for the Hawkeyes, but I think it's also a question for the Gophers, where they were not good in the secondary last year. This year they have not faced much of a competent passing attack. Honestly, Iowa may have just as competent as of a passing attack as North Carolina did when Minnesota played North Carolina, because I do think that in passing the football, at least in that game, McNamara would have been as effective as Max Johnson and maybe as effective as Connor Harrell. But you look at these defenses, and Minnesota's, I think, is good. It's better than it was last season. And you saw that by how they were able to create turnovers against North Carolina, cover North Carolina's receivers pretty well. And North Carolina's good receivers, good tight ends. They're able to get some pressure on a respectable North Carolina offensive line. But Iowa's defense, you have to give it respect. And they lost to Iowa State and choked it away. But they only gave up 20 points still to what could be one of the better offenses in the Big 12, perhaps the Big 12's best offense. When you look at trench play and special teams, I got to give Iowa the edge in both. Iowa at this point has a better kicker. Stevens has done more than Kesich has this season. Reese Dakin has been a weapon at punter. Caden Wetjen is a good returner, punt returner and kick returner. And in the trenches, Iowa has both the better offensive line, running the ball more effectively, allowing less sacks and pressures, and defensively, well, this is going to be interesting. Let's look at the sack numbers for these defenses. Iowa's nine sacks. Their leader in sacks currently is Aaron Graves. Their defensive line in total has all 9 sacks on the team. You look at Minnesota on the season has 7 sacks, and overall, 3 of them are attributed to non-defensive linemen. So better D-line, better O-line means better trench play. And when you look at coaching, and you'll probably already see where I'm going in this game, I got to give Kirk Ferentz the edge. Got to give him the edge over PJ Fleck. I do. I mean, they have worked with... Iowa's had more talent and actually a lot more recruiting success than Minnesota has, but the 50th and 25th most talented teams are closer together than the 25th and 5th most talented teams. And they both played in the Big Ten West, and I would say that Kirk Ferentz handicapped himself more than PJ Fleck did offensively. Much more. And PJ Fleck has really chosen to run the same thing over and over again in offense, which is ground and pound even if it's not working. I got to give Ferentz credit for somehow being more stubborn than Fleck and yet more successful and more efficient. Phil Parker's the nation's #1 defensive coordinator. Iowa's strength and conditioning is pretty darn good, and their assistant coaches are also among the nation's best when you look on defense. Minnesota, even with Iowa's upgrade on the offensive coaching staff, I think Minnesota clearly has the better offensive coaching staff. Better wide receivers coach, I would say better running backs coach. Greg Harbaugh and Matt Simon, I think, make up a better coordinator and position coach group or unit than Tim Lester does. And I like Tim Lester, but I have to see who he is, because coaching at Iowa is different than coaching at Western Michigan. It just is. The Big Ten is way different and also obviously way better than the MAC is. But given the coaching edge and the roster edge, I do think Iowa covers this 2.5 point spread. I think they do beat Minnesota on the road in a 20-13 style game. I will tell you, because Iowa has been hitting the over in their games, Vegas is taking note, and they're kind of, hitting the up on those over-unders for Iowa. I got to tell you right here, over-under is 36.5, I think, right now. If I'm going to give you any betting advice, it would be to take the under. Because while Minnesota and Iowa, I think, will score more points against each other than they have in the previous 2 seasons, this rivalry's never really been high scoring under Kirk Ferentz and PJ Fleck. It just hasn't. And I don't have faith in these quarterbacks against these secondaries and linebacker rooms to make consistent plays. And Iowa's defensive line, I think, is much better right now as a unit than Minnesota's O-line is. And Minnesota's D-line is, I think, more talented than most PJ Fleck offensive lines have been in the past, or most PJ Fleck defensive lines have been in the past, but also probably more talented than some of PJ Fleck's offensive lines, because right now Minnesota's offensive line is not doing what it needs to do. It just isn't. So I look for Iowa to win. I look for them to cover. Score of 22-13. That's my prediction for this game. Okay. Let's see what any of you have to say in the chat. Looks like you guys don't have to say much. Oh my gosh. Someone put 30-17 Minnesota. Isn't that fascinating? Oh well. We will continue. We'll continue our march on forward. Michigan State at Boston College. Michigan State Spartans take on Boston College on the road, with BC being a 6.5-point home favorite. Boston College last won this matchup in 2007 when they met in the postseason. It was between Jeff Jagodzinski and Mark D'Antonio, I believe, was the matchup here. And these two teams are similar in the sense that they have already overachieved their preseason expectations. Boston College is 2-1, competed in my mind with the top 10 Missouri team, smashed Florida State, destroyed Duquesne. Michigan State is 3-0, beating FAU close, beating Maryland in a close game. They finally got a dominant win over Prairie View A&M, which I kind of viewed as sort of a bye week anyway, and they came out and they handled business, winning 40-0. These two teams, again, they've exceeded preseason expectations. I do think they're well coached. Their quarterback play has a lot of upside to it, and their offensive lines and their defensive lines are underrated. Do not ignore the Spartans and the Eagles and what they can do in the trenches. Don't ignore it. Looking at these teams, just from a broad stroke perspective, Boston College per FPI should win pretty handily. Boston College is given 10.2 points better than the average college football team in FPI. Michigan State is only viewed as being 1 point better than the average college football team. And per S&P Plus, Michigan State is rated similarly. They're only given an extra 0.4 points compared to the average college football team. Boston College is given 3.2 points extra than the average college football team. S&P Plus is less reactive, far less reactive than FPI is, I think, early in the season. And these numbers show that. Florida State was very overvalued, extremely overvalued in the preseason, by myself included, and basically everyone. Like, I don't think anyone expected Florida State to go 0-3, except for someone who was biased against Florida State. And it happened, and Boston College was a big part of that. As for Michigan State, many expected them to lose to Maryland. It looks like they could have lost to FAU in week 1, but here they are at 3-0. These two teams have exceeded expectations. They are, I think, efficient at punching above their weight class. Bill O'Brien has worked wonders in college before at Penn State. He was a coach in the NFL for many years, and some didn't know if he would adapt to the college game and utilize what Boston College had in store for him, what Jeff Hafley left when he departed to become the defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. Well, Bill O'Brien and his staff have utilized Thomas Castellanos' rushing capability and also his passing capability rather nicely. Castellanos is currently top 10 in QBR. As for Michigan State, you have Jonathan Smith. You have their offensive coordinator, Brian Lindgren, defensive coordinator, Joe Rossi. I think they make up one of the best staffs, not just in the Big Ten, but in college football. So, two underrated teams who are well coached, going head to head. And when you look at points per play margin, which really just subjectively, really this early, once you get further along in the season and these numbers even out, subjectivity of the fact that points per play margin per teamrankings.com doesn't adjust for strength of schedule, it all sorts itself out. Because, well, these teams have to play in the college football playoff, and by the time that 12 teams have to be selected for the playoff, you will see how dominant they are in their average performance. And even when strength of schedule isn't taken into account with that, you can look at potential power before the national championship and playoff happen, and you can get a pretty darn good idea of who can win the national title. For example, Michigan was number 1 in points per play margin last season for much of the year. and they ended up winning it all. And Georgia was similar in 2022 and also in 2021 in that regard. And you can go back further and see a strong correlation between the best teams in not potential power, but in points per play margin, and the best teams in college football. Michigan State and Boston College are not the best teams in college football, nor are they close to being the best in points per play margin, but they're about the same. Michigan State has a 0.089 points per play margin edge when looking at, well, their average points per play margin against each team they play. And for Boston College, it's a 0.083 average points per play margin against the teams that they have played. Both of these teams have played 3 games. They have not had a bye yet. And they've each played an FCS team. Duquesne for Boston College and Prairie View A&M for Michigan State. So these teams are pretty rested. And while Michigan State's dealing with some injuries in the secondary, I think Boston College is relatively healthy, just looking at things from a broad angle. You look at the fact that Michigan State has a strength of schedule rate of 57th, game control rating of 41. Boston College is the 13th toughest strength of schedule and a game control rating of 16th. Here's where you begin to see some disparities. Boston College is more tested because of that Missouri game, and also what's skewed a little bit toward Boston College is the fact that when they beat Florida State was still viewed as a top 25 team by a lot of computers and by some people even after that Georgia Tech game. After that Georgia Tech game, I still thought that Florida State was a fringe top 25 team. Obviously, turns out that they weren't. That's why they're 0-3 now, but we didn't know that then. So I look at these teams here, and Boston College is more tested. The fact that they're at home and they've controlled their games better. They've been very dominant, running the football, controlling the clock. Castellanos, with his legs and his arm, has kept Boston College in football games in control. They did that against Missouri, for example, where they only lost by 6 points. And Castellanos was taking advantage, and I mean taking advantage of that Missouri secondary. So it makes sense why Boston College is favored by 6.5 points. I think that is, very fair, to be honest. For Michigan State, what they have to do is slow down Boston College's rushing attack. Both Castellanos, Robichaud, Ward, and also that offensive line, which for Boston College is one of the better offensive lines in the ACC. That's what Michigan State has to do. Will they? It's a tall task. I think Michigan State has the defense to potentially do it, specifically the defensive line, where despite the fact that they lost Derek Harmon and Simeon Barrow, they have looked good through 3 games there. But Boston College has NFL caliber players like Drew Kendall at center on the offensive line. Who would have thought it? Boston College with NFL players. But it's happened before. You look at Matt Ryan at Boston College. This time, you don't have Matt Ryan at quarterback. You have Matt Ryan at center in Drew Kendall. And then Jude Bowery, Logan Taylor, Jack Conley, Ozzie Trapillo. They have an awesome front 5 on that offensive line. And they have some backups too, who I guarantee you, with some seniors in there, have playing experience and can hold their own. And then Robichaud ran for 1,000 yards last year. Treshaun Ward has made himself be known, particularly in that Florida State opener, but also just in general with how he has ran the football. And Turbo Richard, as a true freshman, has gotten active in the rushing attack as well. When you look at Boston College, their leading rusher on the season is Treshaun Ward with 153 rushing yards. Robichaud's had 121. Thomas Castellanos has had 97. He's been sacked 5 times. I believe most of those times that he got sacked were against Missouri. He had 2 sacks, was sacked 2 times by Missouri, 3 times by Florida State, and Missouri did a good job of containing his rushes. He had a long scramble of 7 against the Tigers, who I think have a ridiculously wicked defensive line. It's the secondary where the Tigers have a bit of an issue. But Boston College has averaged 5 yards per carry. They've had 5 rushing touchdowns, 618 rushing yards. And Castellanos has passed for 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's averaging 10.9 yards per pass attempt, and his receivers are averaging 16.5 yards per completion. He has a 204 passer rating through 3 games and a QBR that is top 10 through 3 games. And as for Michigan State, their defensive line and their linebackers and defense in total has already had over 10 sacks on the season. They had a pick 6 against Prairie View A&M. They have a few interceptions and passes deflected, all with a banged up secondary, where Dylan Tatum is out for the year, and I think there are some other players who are out. We'll get back to the defense, though, for the Spartans and also the Eagles in a few minutes, but first and foremost, I want to get to the offenses here. Michigan State's only advantage is at tight end, where they have Jack Velling, who is a future NFL tight end being developed at Oregon State by Jonathan Smith and his staff, and transferring over to the Spartans when Smith took the job in East Lansing. That's about it, though, for Michigan State. Michigan State could have the argument of having a better wide receiver core than Boston College, but I think that goes both ways. Nick Marsh and Monterey Foster are the only players for Michigan State who have over 10 receptions. Marsh has 11, Foster is 13. Marsh has 232 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. Monterey Foster Jr. has 113 receiving yards and a touchdown. For Boston College, their leading receiver is Lewis Bond with 10 receptions for 156 yards and a touchdown. Reed Harris has 3 receptions for 149 yards and 2 touchdowns, with an average currently of 49.7 yards per catch. That's nuts. That number's definitely going to come down, but we have seen players like Tyler Harrell, I believe was his name before, were at Louisville, I think in, 2021, or maybe it was 2022. I'm pretty sure it was one of those years, I forget. He had like 20 yards per reception on average, and that was consistent throughout the whole season. Just speedy guy, didn't work out at Alabama, but it just is what it is. I mean, Ja'Cory Brooks, after having a good year in 2022, had a down year full of injuries at Alabama in 23, and then transferred to Louisville, where so far he's doing pretty well, and I hope he continues. But outside of tight end and wide receiver, outside of receiver collective for these two teams, Boston College does have a clear edge here. They have the better quarterback. Castellanos has thrown more touchdown passes, fewer interceptions. He's used his legs more, and he's just the better quarterback right now compared to Aiden Childs. He's completing almost 10% more of his passes than Childs is. He's averaging 3 yards more per attempt than Childs is. Childs has thrown about 28 more times, but nonetheless what Thomas Castellanos has done is very impressive, and I trust him more with his legs than I do with Aiden Childs. And when you look just at the sack numbers, and sack numbers don't tell the whole story, but they tell part of a story. Boston College has allowed 6 sacks with only 57 passing attempts. Michigan State has 92 passing attempts, and they've only allowed 3 sacks. Granted, the best D-line that Michigan State has played all year is nowhere close to Missouri's defensive line. And Florida State's defensive line probably has higher potential players and more high-octane players on their line than anyone that Michigan State has played does. But Florida State has chemistry issues on defense, which is why they can't put all that talent together. And as for Missouri, when your secondary plays as poorly as they did, well, that can kind of alleviate the pressure that your defensive line can put on an opposing quarterback. I also look at, this was difficult because I love Nate Carter and I love K'Ron Lynch-Adams, who each have around 200 rushing yards or averaging over 5 yards per carry and have a rushing touchdown. I love them. But Treshaun Ward and Kai Robichaux and Turbo Richard, they provide better depth. Treshaun Ward did well at Florida State, well at Kansas State, looks to be getting in his own groove at Boston College, and Robichaux's a proven 1,000-yard back in a Power 4 conference. Nate Carter has not hit 1,000 yards yet in a season in his career, and Lynch-Adams at 1,000 yards at UMass. So Michigan State could have the better running back room, and they may prove that this Saturday. But I think right now, based off of what we've seen, I got to go with Boston College there. And it's the same thing with the offensive line, where Boston College, look, they're averaging 5 yards per carry right now. They faced some wicked defensive lines and held their own and controlled games. As for the Michigan State Spartans, they're averaging 5.9 yards per carry against much weaker defenses. And I have to lean Boston College. They have better NFL players. The interior of these lines, I think, is stronger than the exterior. I think these offensive lines are better at run blocking than they are at pass blocking. Like Drew Kendall, Jack Conley, Logan Taylor, I trust more than Jude Bowery and Ozzie Trapillo. And as for Michigan State, I trust Tanner Miller. I trust Kristen Phillips and Luke Newman more than I do Brandon Baldwin and Ashton Lepo. That's the offense. When you look at the defense here, Michigan State is better on defense, objectively. They have the better defensive line, the better linebacker room, and when it comes to defensive back, that's where I begin to have my questions. Florida State has an offense that's far worse than Maryland's, and that might be as bad as Florida Atlantic's. I mean, Florida State's offense is awful. So there's not much you can take away from Boston College holding them to 13 points. I mean, Memphis did a better job against Florida State's offense than Boston College did. The only thing you can take away is Boston College against Missouri. Now, Missouri scored 27 points, but Missouri kicked 4 field goals and I believe had 2 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion. They had over 400 yards, and Missouri started out very slow and looked rusty, but then quickly got their act together and pulled away and controlled that game in the second half. So there's an argument for Boston College. There's a proposition that they could have the better defense, but I like what Michigan State has produced on defense so far this year more than Boston College. You look at Michigan State, they have 11 sacks, 4 passes defended, a forced fumble, 4 interceptions, and a pick 6. Boston College has 5 sacks, 12 passes defended, 3 interceptions for a pick 6, and a forced fumble. For Boston College, their leader in sacks right now is Donovan Ezuraku. I definitely butchered that name. Please pardon me. And then Neto Okpala and George Rooks also have a sack each. For Michigan State, their attack is a lot more diverse. Chris Bogle leads the team in sacks with 2.5. Jordan Turner has 2. Ken Talley has 1.5. And Ed Woods, Daquan Deuce, Alex Van Sumeren, Cal Halliday, and Anthony Jones each have a sack. Joe Rossi has rebuilt this defense, reformed it in one season. What he has done is no doubt impressive with the Michigan State Spartans, and that goes, say the same with Jonathan Smith and this entire Michigan State staff, and also with Boston College and their staff. Boston College has a great defensive line. I think Michigan State's is better and perhaps more importantly deeper, but both of these defensive lines are good and very underrated. I think Michigan State's clearly better at linebacker. Defensive back is a push because Michigan State's injured there, and that's still, I think, clearly their weakness on this defense due to all the previous seasons of horrific and porous secondary development, and the fact that they allowed Prairie View A&M to have success on them through the air. Billy Edwards had success on them through the air more than Roman Hemby and his offensive line did on the ground versus Michigan State when the Terrapins played them. And overall, Boston College has, again, played Missouri, who has Luther Burden and Brady Cook and Mookie Cooper. Missouri's non-negotiables their passing offense. And Boston College, while not doing great or even good against that passing offense, was able to hold them in check enough to remain within striking distance for much of that game. As for Michigan State, if they were to play Missouri, I would probably have had them perform at a higher level in stopping the run than BC did, but I don't think they would have held Missouri, the Spartans, would have to 4 field goals. I think Missouri would have scored touchdown after touchdown, especially through the air on a Michigan State secondary that's better than it was last year by a lot, but that's not saying much. That unit is still vulnerable. Jalen Thompson is a player to look out for on defense. Same with Maverick Hansen on the defensive line for the Spartans. Jordan Hall, Jordan Turner, Charles Brantley are some players to look out for. Same with Angelo Gross, Ed Woods in the defensive back room. And as for Boston College, you got Cam Horsley, George Rooks, Neto Akpala, Donovan Ezuraku. I'm just having a hard time pronouncing that last name. I'm so sorry. And then Davion Crouch, Cam Arnold at linebacker, and then Amari Jackson, Carter Davis, Max Tucker in the secondary. let's talk about trench play and special teams. I think trench play here is pretty darn equal. I think that Michigan State is a better defensive line. Boston College is a better offensive line. And the interior of the O-lines are close. Tackle is close. Defensive tackle, I would say Boston College has better D tackles than DNs. For Michigan State, based off of what I've seen, I'd say they're pretty equal. I don't exactly know. I think Michigan State has better defensive tackle depth, but Michigan State's had a lot of success in getting pressure at defensive end, linebacker, and defensive tackle. I'd say the trenches of these two teams are equal, though if I had to choose one, I would choose Boston College, like if you put a gun to my head. But we don't do that on this show. If there is a push, if there is an area where there's a little bit of, well, there's only a little bit of separation or there's a lot of wiggle room in a massive gray area, I think we should be comfortable saying, you know what, both are good there or both are bad. There's going to be another matchup that determines the winner. For special teams, I'd pick Michigan State here. They have a really good punter in Ryan Eckley, a great kicker in Jonathan Kim. Boston College is outside the top 100 in special teams efficiency per FPI, and Michigan State's in the top 25. So trenches and special teams, trenches are pretty equal. Michigan State, I think, is the edge at special teams. And as for coaching, maybe this is incorrect, but I think Michigan State is one of the best staffs in the country. I think Jonathan Smith's a top 10 head coach. I think that Brian Lindgren and Michigan's offensive staff are top 10. I think Michigan State is a top 20 defensive staff. And I think Mike McDonald is a top 5 strength and conditioning coach. Bill O'Brien and his staff, while clearly underrated compared to what people thought of them in the preseason, and right now they're 2-1, competed with Missouri. They're undefeated in ACC conference play, and they could do damage in the ACC. Their staff's good, but I don't think it's elite or near elite like Michigan State's is. I'm very bullish on the Spartan staff. And that, along with the fact that I think Michigan State roster-wise can punch above their weight class and come close to being toe-to-toe with Boston College, is why I'm giving Michigan State the edge. Boston College is favored by 6.5 points. I think Michigan State covers the spread by 9.5 points. And I think they win by 3. 23-20 being the score. Boston College, I think, will do fine through the air. What I think will surprise some people, though, is the fact that Michigan State with Nate Carter, with their offensive line, I think Michigan State will actually run the ball more effectively when you look at the stat sheet. Maybe the stat sheet's deceiving, maybe it's not, but I do think that Michigan State will actually outrun the Eagles here. And Michigan State has a strong interior offensive line and a strong running back room, but Boston College is a strong defensive line. And it goes the other way too. I mean, I would not advise being a betting man on picking which team is going to outrush the other. I'm pretty sure, though, given the state of these secondaries and also the quarterbacks and how they've passed the football, I'm pretty sure, especially with it being on the road, and the fact that Aiden Giles is, still a young QB, younger than Castellanos, I think Boston College will have more success through the air, especially when it comes to big plays. I think Boston College will have more success through the air. They've proven that whether it's with Ward or their receivers, they can create big plays with their quarterback in the passing game. Michigan State's proven that too, but I think that with BC and Michigan State having similar secondaries, similar wide receiver rooms, and then Castellanos being the better quarterback through this point and it being on the road, and Michigan State, they may be looking ahead to Ohio State. I still think they win, but if Michigan State's going to win this game, it's going to be because of the fact that they're able to scrape out another one. And I think, how do they do that? Superior special teams and trench play that can go toe-for-toe against Boston College, and a better game plan from a better staff that helps them to overcome that equality and that neutrality in the trenches, to turn that into a slight advantage, and also to do better on defense than Boston College does, and maybe even do better through the passing game, even though I think BC is quite an underrated wide receiver core and quarterback. So, 2 games through, we got 2 more left. I don't know how many of you are going to even want to stay on for this because we are pretty late through the night, but we're getting solid concurrent viewers here. I am going to take a little bit of a break, throw in some ads. If you guys want to throw in a super chat or 2, I'll answer those when I get back from my brief water break. But I'll get back and we'll get down to business. So I'll see you guys pretty shortly. And we are back. We're back. Thank you all for being on here. I am a little bit tired, I'm not going to lie, but I think that we're still doing pretty great with these previews. So, yeah. We'll march forward. We will march forward. I see you guys don't have anything for me, so we're just gonna get back to business here. Yeah, thank you, P, for being on here. Tennessee fan, Chimichanga guy, thank you for being a reliable moderator. Oh yeah, guys, don't forget to join the Discord. Discord is via the link in the pinned comment. Don't forget that. Thank you to Fiddy for being on here. I've seen him a lot in these comment sections. Thank you to Michael Valadez for being on here. Michael Valdez, Nebraska fan. I went to Colorado versus Nebraska in person and did a video with Corn Crazed on my Kane Red Fist YouTube channel. Let me check that out. That would be interesting. Thank you to Armand Hammer for being active in the chat. Very much appreciate it. And yeah, you know what games we're on to next, by the way. Not Big Ten games. An SEC matchup and a Big 12 matchup. That's what's coming up next. We have, and I know someone in the chat's going to love this. We got, thank you for reminding me. What? Did I not do that correctly? I guess I didn't. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, guys, by the way, which it shows on here, that's not how it goes. I'm live Monday and Wednesday, typically at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I just had a late start to today because, well, something came up. I don't live at home alone, so times are subject to be, fluid, probably within an hour, depending on, certain things that happen. But yeah, Monday, Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern time, there is going to be something about another live stream probably within the next week, but I have no promises yet, so just stay tuned for that. What we are going to be talking about now up here on the screen is a little bit of Tennessee versus Oklahoma action. That's what we're going to be talking about here. Tennessee is beyond dominant, and they've played a weak strength of schedule, I know. But this team is murdering people left and right. They put up a 70-burger on Kent State, they annihilated NC State, and they killed Chattanooga, which neither of those teams are impressive in any way. But when you look at Oklahoma, and who Oklahoma's played, they have played Temple, they have played Tulane, and Houston. And neither of those teams are all that impressive either. Yes, on an average basis, they're better than what Tennessee has played, most likely, because NC State would probably be favored over any team that Oklahoma played. But that's why Tennessee's a 7-point favorite on the road, and Oklahoma's environment is not lame. Their stadium's not tiny. So really what these people are telling you here, the Vegas experts, are saying that Tennessee would beat Oklahoma by double digits at a neutral field. That's what they're telling you. And Oklahoma won this matchup, I believe, in overtime in 2015, 31-24. That was the last meeting between these two teams. This will be the first time that Josh Heupel is back in Norman, Oklahoma, since he was fired at the end of the 2014 season. And Josh Heupel was a quarterback at Oklahoma. So there's a lot of emotion and a lot of, it gets personal, if you know what I mean, in this game here, in this top 15 matchup between Oklahoma and between Tennessee. Tennessee is rated inside of the top 10 at 6th. Oklahoma is 15th in the AP poll. And when you look at these teams from a broad stroke view, that's what we love to do here on College Football with Sam. Tennessee in FPI is about 11 points, 10.9 points exactly better than Oklahoma. And per S&P Plus from Bill Connolly, Tennessee is around 9.7 exactly points better than Oklahoma. Tennessee is 24.4 per FPI and 26.5 per S&P Plus points better than the average college football team. And they're top 25 in every power rating. In fact, in FPI, they're ranked higher than Georgia right now. Oklahoma, 13.5 points in FPI and 16.8 points in SP+. Those numbers say that Oklahoma's about 2 scores better than the average college football team. And they started the year in the top 10. They have been sinking in power ratings, particularly in FPI, because FPI cares more about point friendliness and quarterback play and style points, and SP Plus is more, tempo based, I think is more complex, less reactive. And I think that's fair because Oklahoma still has a really good defense and they do have talent on offense, and they've unfortunately been dealing with injuries there. But Tennessee is universally viewed as the superior team by Football Power and by S&P Plus and by the analysts. They're favored by 7, and many people have already picked them to go into Norman and make it a bloodletting based off of the first 3 weeks. But let's see if that applies to scrutiny, because trends, while sometimes can be correct, I mean, look at the fact that everyone picked Texas to beat Michigan, and they did. Many picked Texas to even dominate Michigan, and they did. Trends are just trends. They can be manipulated. They can have deceitful intentions behind them. Will Tennessee go on the road and handily beat Oklahoma, as this point spread implies? I look at Tennessee, and with their offense and their defense, they have Nico Imaliava as quarterback, and they have James Pierce Jr. on the defensive end. They have some X-factor players that are just wicked, that are hard to deal with. And they have really good wide receivers, a coach who is a genius in terms of developing offensive tactics and schematics in Josh Heupel. Brew McCoy looks like he's about to have a bounce back year. They have 4 receivers of over 100 yards right now. The Volunteers do. Oklahoma only has 1 receiver, Deion Burks, with over 100 yards. Tennessee, they have 4 sacks. And right now, their leader in sacks is tied with Jacoby Thomas, Dominic Bailey, Omar Norman-Lott, and Tyree West. It doesn't even look like James Pierce Jr. has a single sack yet. But I'm telling you, he's a first rounder, projected first rounder, and he's an All-American caliber defensive end right now. And you look at how Tennessee's defense has performed, like killing NC State, shutting out Kent State, doing exceptionally well against Chattanooga, as they should, and compare it to how their offense has played. There's a reason why Tennessee has a 0.725 points per play margin, which is third nationally. TeamRankings.com, with the points per play margin, is basically telling you that Tennessee right now, not adjusting for strength of schedule, is the 3rd most dominant team in college football. Compare that to Oklahoma, who has still a pretty good 0.481 points per play margin, but that is like the same distance from last year's Michigan to, let's say, last year's Kansas State. Like, last year's Kansas State was good, but last year's Michigan was elite in terms of dominance, the most dominant team in the country last year. That right now, and again, we're only 3 games in, which is a lot different than, 15 games for last year's Michigan, or 15 for Washington, or 14 for Georgia, Texas, Alabama. Like, the sample size right now is still very small. But with how big the gap is, that does imply that even if you were to adjust for strength of schedule, or even if Oklahoma were to play a good game and Tennessee were to play just an average game, that there is something to Tennessee being the more dominant team. There just is. When you look at strength of schedule and game control, both of these teams are pretty similar. Tennessee is 5th in game control. Oklahoma is 12th. Their strength of schedules both reside outside of the top 90. Oklahoma is the 100th best strength of schedule. Tennessee is the 122nd best strength of schedule. And really, when you look at how close they are in game control and strength of schedule, it does not shock me all that much that these two teams are, well, teams that have great defenses, good offensive talent. They're both SEC caliber teams. I don't think either of these teams, as it stands right now, can be given the banner of being the best team in the SEC. And this is a big game for that reason. How well can these two teams do in this matchup? If Oklahoma wins big, or if Tennessee wins big, that's a massive statement win that could propel them to being viewed as, hey, this team can not just reach the college football playoff, but they can win the SEC and perhaps win it all. That's the broad team comparison, which, again, we like to do. The critical matchup here is Tennessee's offense, but more specifically, their quarterback, their running back, and their offensive line against an Oklahoma front that's a little bit banged up, but still has a stud in Danny Stutzman and other great players on that front. I think that we understand that Tennessee does not have the passing offense they did in 2022. Probably not even the passing offense they did in 2021. And Oklahoma's secondary is really, really good. So I think that is going to be a big battle, an interesting battle. The more underrated matchup, and I think the one that will decide this game, is Tennessee's offense and really their rushing offense, because Tennessee's offense is at its best when they can run the football well against an Oklahoma team that is good on defense, great on defense, maybe even elite, but at times last year, whether it was against Kansas or Oklahoma State, they just couldn't put the run game away. They struggled against teams that were awesome at running the football outside of Texas, and even then, Texas was still able to, stay on schedule against them. That's the matchup here that I am looking most forward to, is Nico Imaliava. It's Dylan Sampson for Tennessee, and the fact that Dylan Sampson right now has 357 rushing yards. He's averaging almost 8 yards per carry with 9 rushing touchdowns. Deshaun Bishop has 222 rushing yards with 3 rushing touchdowns. Tennessee, through 3 games, this is insane. Through 3 games, they have 1,000 rushing yards and 14 rushing touchdowns, and they're averaging 7 yards per carry. And Nico Iamaleava has only been sacked once. Jake Merklinger, their third-string quarterback, has been sacked more times than their starter. So this offense, specifically that ground attack, the line, quarterback play, that's what has impressed me the most. And for Oklahoma, they do have questions in the front, but they're still pretty good there, and it wouldn't shock me at all if they're able to really hold this Tennessee rushing offense in check. When you look at these offenses, Tennessee is better at quarterback, running back, tight end, offensive line. Oklahoma, if healthy, I would say is better at receiver, but they're still banged up there, and I don't know how healthy they will be come kickoff. This game, by the way, between Tennessee and Oklahoma, which is the highest ranked matchup of the week, this game, it takes place, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 6:30 p.m. Central Time, as it is in Norman, the Central Time Zone, Norman, Oklahoma. It's on ABC and ESPN+. This is, if Oklahoma, think about it this way. If Oklahoma was more dominant on offense, and if the offensive line was more clearly cohesive than it has been through 3 games, this could be a top 10 matchup. Because Oklahoma's a big name, they're a good team, there's a lot of excitement surrounding them, and they've recruited well. It's been their performance against Houston and Tulane that's held them back from being ranked higher. Like, if they were blowing out teams like they did last season with Dillon Gabriel at quarterback and a healthier receiver room, they may be top 10, and we'd have one of our first top 10 matchups and our first SEC top 10 matchup of the 2024 season. Nico Iamaleava has done way better than Jackson Arnold. Far better. Iamaleava has 698 passing yards. He is completing over 70% of his throws, 6 touchdown passes, 2 picks, a 182.7 passer rating. He has 102 rushing yards for a rushing touchdown as well, and he has a QBR of 80.7, which is 21st. Jackson Arnold, meanwhile, has 484 passing yards, completing only about 63% of his throws, 7 passing touchdowns, 2 picks, a passer rating of 132.3, which is only 8 points better than Cade McNamara's passer rating, and he has a QBR of 58, which is 63rd nationally. It certainly looks like, even though Dillon Gabriel's a better supporting cast, Gabriel's probably the better quarterback than Jackson Arnold, based off of what I've watched, and even factoring in supporting cast. Although when you factor in supporting cast, it's still very early, and Arnold could develop into the better quarterback. After all, he was the better recruit out of high school, and he has an arm strength talent of his that I don't think Dillon Gabriel does have. But Tennessee's better on the lines of scrimmage on offense. They have the better tight ends. They got a good transfer from Notre Dame at tight end in Holden Stays, and they also have Miles Kitselman, and they've combined for just over 100 receiving yards and also 3 receiving touchdowns. And also Ethan Davis is a backup there with 34 receiving yards and a touchdown. They're deeper and better at tight end. It's the same thing at running back, quarterback, offensive line. Wide receivers a push, but Oklahoma, I think, would have perhaps a strong edge there if they were fully healthy. Defensively, Tennessee is the better defensive line. Outside of that, I think Oklahoma has the edge at linebacker and cornerback. James Pierce Jr. is just too much of a non-negotiable for me to say that Oklahoma, even with some of the great defensive ends that they have, are better at edge. And you also have, for Tennessee, keep in mind, you got Omar Norman-Lott, Dominic Bailey, Tyree West. You got Keenan Peely at linebacker. And it's just really an impressive defense that Tennessee has put together in their defensive coordinator, Tim Banks. And you look at Oklahoma, they got Danny Stutzman, they have Woody Washington, they have, I forget the name of the player, it's escaping me, but 5-star out of high school, Peyton Bowen, yes, at safety. They also have Kip Lewis at linebacker, they have Des Malone in the defensive back room. And they have, I think, Billy Bowman Jr. as well, who has a pass defended and an interception and 11 total tackles, and Robert Spears Jennings as well. On the defensive line, you have players like Ashton Sanders. You have Devon Sears. I'm naming a lot of backups right now, but also R. Mason Thomas. And they're going to have a lot in that rotation on the defensive line because of some injuries that Oklahoma has. But Danny Stutzman, Robert Spears Jennings, Woody Washington, Billy Bowman Jr., I mean, they make up a really good secondary, really good pass defense, and efficient tacklers at linebacker. Don't forget Kip Lewis either. I do like Oklahoma's defense over Tennessee's, though it is not to the same degree that I like Tennessee's offense over Oklahoma's offense. So you got Brent Venables, a defensive-minded head coach with a team that has a much better defense than offense. You got Josh Heupel in Tennessee with a team that I will go as far to say I think they have a much better offense than defense. I mean, their defense is good. It may be great or near elite, but they haven't played anyone with an offense that is honestly worth a pulse compared to SEC or Big Ten teams, or most, honestly, ACC and Big 12 teams. I mean, NC State's looked horrific on offense. Kent State lost to an FCS team who'd never beaten an FBS team before. And Chattanooga is an FCS team. And I think also there's the idea that Tennessee is able to be so efficient on offense and rack up so many quick points that they put opposing offenses into a one-dimensional hole. And therefore, opposing offenses, when they are getting dominated by Tennessee and they're trying to score, it's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. And I think that better offenses, Oklahoma will have the best offense. Think about it this way. Jackson Arnold, who doesn't even have a top 50 QBR, will be the best quarterback by a mile that Tennessee has played all season long. So that defense for Tennessee isn't really tested one bit. The offense, is good based off of the numbers they're putting up, the talent they have, and the expertise of the staff. Oklahoma's defense and offense, Oklahoma as a team is probably more overall tested than Tennessee is. Part of it's their fault. Another part of it's the fact they have played the slightly better strength of schedule. Trench warfare in special teams. College Football with Sam is typically covering the Big Ten. But I'm going out of my way to talk about this SEC matchup because it's a big deal. It's between two teams that aren't Alabama, aren't Georgia, aren't Ole Miss, aren't Texas. They are not the preseason darlings. So I wanted to talk about it because I think that Oklahoma's a good, great team, and they have the potential to be near elite. And I think Tennessee this year may actually have some serious potential to be elite, and they're certainly a good, great, near elite team right now. I do think that Tennessee has a much better offensive line than Oklahoma. They also have a better defensive line, so consequently I think they have a pretty big advantage in the trenches. Oklahoma, though, I think does have the better special teams than the Tennessee Volunteers. Trench play is a pretty big deal, and Oklahoma, if they want to win this game, they're going to have to come in with their pants on fire on the offensive line, and Bill Biedenbaugh is going to have to coach a very good performance and harness a good performance out of his offensive line. For Oklahoma on the defensive line, the plan is simpler. They're the best defensive line and best defense by a mile that Tennessee's played all season long. So just do what they can do what they know how to do, and maybe they'll actually dominate Tennessee's offense, or maybe they'll get dominated. We'll just have to see. And when I look at coaching here, Oklahoma's better on defense, I think by a significant margin. Tennessee is better on offense by a significant margin. And really where Tennessee has the edge in coaching is I think that Josh Heupel is a better head coach than Brent Venables. And I also think that Tennessee is better conditioned. And I think where I really see that is the trenches. And the fact that Tennessee is healthier right now. And I don't want to say injuries are like always the fault of someone, because sometimes they just happen. But having your players get repeatedly hurt or hurt to a large degree can sometimes be an indicator that there's something up with your strength and conditioning staff. And I think that Tennessee, through 3 games, and also looking at the previous 2 seasons, 3 seasons, I only really want to look at 2 because that's how long Brent Venables has been there. I do think Tennessee is well conditioned. I do think that they are strong. They're clearly trying to be physical along with being explosive and having athleticism. For Oklahoma, you just haven't seen all of those things come together yet, which is why I'm picking Tennessee to win this game. I'm picking them to cover and win big. I'm talking like 41-17 big. I don't think Oklahoma's a top 15, even top 20 team. I think they're top 25. I think they're good. And they can be great. They can be near elite. But they can't be elite with what they have on the offensive line. Tennessee can be elite. Tennessee can be as good as they were in 2022. Just with a better rushing offense, worse passing offense, and a better defense. This Tennessee team right now is dominant. And even with their weak strength of schedule, you cannot deny the sheer amount of dominance they have imposed on other teams. You can't deny that. I mean, look again at the numbers. They have had nearly 2,000 yards of offense through 3 games. They're putting up more than 600 yards per game. They're putting up like close to, if not above, 60 points per game. They've ran for over 300 yards per game, averaging 7 yards per carry. I'm a Michigan fan. I would love for Michigan in a given year to start out the season this way on the ground. This is crazy. What Dylan Sampson, Deshaun Bishop, Peyton Lewis, Nico Imaliava, and head coach and offensive mastermind Josh Heupel have done is very, very impressive. Absolutely impressive. And they have some players on defense too. Again, like James Pierce Jr. and Keenan Peely. And also Idris Farouk, who leads the team in tackles along with Will Brooks, 2 defensive backs. And Jacoby Thomas, who has a sack, a pass defended, and 9 total tackles. Like, they have players on defense. Not the same players of Oklahoma, but they have players. And combined with how electric and dominant their offenses looked, well, Oklahoma with honestly more talent than Tennessee per recruiting rankings and a similar strength of schedules looked that much more lethargic. I think that you're going to see the inevitable occur, where Tennessee is just going to do commit a microcosm of what they've done in their first 3 games. And they're going to outpace Oklahoma, make Oklahoma have to pass the ball with Jackson Arnold, and it will eventually get ugly. And by the end of the 4th quarter, we're going to be talking about Oklahoma surviving and advancing throughout the year with one of the toughest schedules in the nation, and Tennessee, who has a very workable schedule. Outside of Oklahoma, their toughest games are hosting Alabama, who they could totally beat, and playing at Georgia, which is a different challenge in and of itself. But those teams, along with Oklahoma, look to be the only teams they play all season who are ranked. So if they beat Oklahoma, like how I think they will, 41-17 dominant fashion, this team could easily go 11-1, 10-2. You may even be looking at a 12-0 ceiling of this team if Georgia's struggles against Kentucky are replicated at any point in the season. Alrighty. Wow, we only have one more game left. Let's see what all of you are saying. Got Jack Harrington here in the chat. Longtime Alabama viewer. Him and Pete. We got some SEC on SEC arguments in here. This is phenomenal. And Chimichanga guy is correct. Tennessee 17 or more. If you think the passing offense is worse than 2022, I'm sorry. Well, can you blame me? I mean, where's Jalen Hyatt? And as of right now, I mean, again, I don't watch Tennessee a ton, but the stats and the numbers and the fact that Tennessee has played nobody, I mean, no one I care about. I can't say they're going to be the same or better than the 2022 passing offense until I see it with my very eyes. I can't say that. Statistics don't back it up. They've played an extremely weak strength of schedule. And just hold off on that for a bit. Reading from the chat, by the way. And again, guys, join my Discord server via the link in the description and also down below in the pinned comment and in the live chat as we are live right now. Let's get to our final game, though, and then we'll close it out. This final matchup here is between 2 Big 12 teams who can still contend for the conference. Not Arizona, who's proven to be a fraud, as I thought. Not Kansas State. They have a not a bit of a ways to go in the sense that they have a lot to be desired of, but their schedule from here on out looks to be pretty easy outside of them hosting Oklahoma State, I think a week after this weekend. But I want to talk about none other than two guys with mullets who look like movie stars, and Kyle Whittingham and Mike Gundy. Oh boy. I'm going to edit this part out before I re-upload it, but I have to go to the bathroom. This is a very humiliating and bad time for this to happen. But, oh well, a little bit of an ad break for you all. Then we'll be back, talk about Utah, Oklahoma State. If you guys have any super chats, send them in because I'll answer them at the end of the stream. If not, right after this game, we'll get off and I'll see you guys on Wednesday. So, speak to you soon. Oh, someone told me about the top 25. Now that I'm back from my break, someone told me about the top 25. What I wanted to announce on this channel is not just talk briefly about my top 25, and this won't be a video that's re-released on YouTube. But what I wanted to do is also talk about the fact that I'm getting pretty bored of top 25s. I don't think that they're that much fun. I think that this early in the year, they're pretty speculative. So probably what I'll do is like actually talk about a top 25 when the college football playoff rankings come about. And that's also when I'm still going to make college football previews, like playoff previews, like this early in the year. But I'll make them more in-depth when the playoff rankings come around. But this is my top 25 right now. And take from it what you will. It's just kind of put together as is. Number 25, Texas A&M. Number 24, Boston College. Number 23, Oklahoma. Number 22, Louisville. 21, Boise State. 20, Notre Dame. 19, Iowa. 18, Iowa State. 17, Clemson. 16, USC. 15, Rutgers. 14, Nebraska. 13, Michigan. 12, Kansas State, 11, Miami, 10, Utah, 9, Oregon, 8, Tennessee, 7, Ole Miss, 6, Missouri, Penn State 5, Georgia 4, Alabama 3, Ohio State 2, and Texas is at number 1. So, that's my top 25 right there. That is my top 25. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, thank you for reminding me about that, I want to get to Oklahoma State and Utah. This game, I'm pretty sure, outside of the maybe Kansas State, Oklahoma State game, Kansas State and Utah avoid each other in the regular season, will be a pretty big part of determining the champion in the Big 12. You also got Iowa State, Kansas State, Iowa State, Utah, and some other matchups. I mean, Kansas, theoretically, if they somehow get things figured out, could still be in the race, but I doubt it based off of what I've seen. And man, I was so high on Kansas, and then Illinois happened, and I'm like, okay, they could still do well in the Big 12. And then UNLV happened, and it's like, whatever. Just is what it is. You know, you can't get everything right. You won't get everything wrong either because there's just so much to predict. And I've actually gotten a fair amount right this year, but also a ton wrong just in the first 3 weeks. Okay, let's get, though, to Oklahoma State and Utah. Utah is taking on Oklahoma State on the road to open up Big 12 conference play. This will be the Utes' first Big 12 game in the history of their program. So history is being made on Saturday, not just with USC versus Michigan, not just with Tennessee versus Oklahoma, Oklahoma's first game in the SEC, and not just with, that doesn't sound correct. Shoot, I'm tired, guys, so I'm just going to restart that so I can, clip it for a video tomorrow. Utah is traveling on the road to Oklahoma State, and the Utes are laying 1.5 points. The line moved from Oklahoma State -2.5 to Utah -1.5, and I can only assume that's because Cam Rising is probably healthy and is probably going to play here. And that's a pretty big deal because when healthy, he's probably one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12, potentially in college football. This is a historic matchup because it's Utah's first game in the Big 12. First game in Big 12 conference play, at least, which is really when, you're kicked off as a team of that conference. Of course, in non-conference games, when Utah's wearing that, Big 12 logo on their jersey, it's formal that they're in the conference, but the true invitational, the ritual of entrance is this matchup for Utah. Utah traveling to Oklahoma State, who is one of the favorites to win the Big 12. So history is not only being made Saturday, with USC versus Michigan, and that being USC's first Big Ten game, Tennessee versus Oklahoma, and that being Oklahoma's first SEC game, or Cal playing Florida State, and that being Cal's first ACC game, but also Utah playing Oklahoma State, and that being Utah's first Big 12 game. College football conference realignment can sometimes be a pain in the butt, and I've talked about how there are things about it I don't like. This, though, like the new rivalries, the new games and matchups, I'm honestly very excited about it. I'm pumped for this game. Oklahoma State has only met Utah once on the battlefield, and they won 46-6 in 1945, the only time that these schools matched up against each other. Let's see where these two teams stand against each other in Boone Pickens Stadium. The broad team comparison, looking at these teams from a bird's eye view, shows us that the power rankings, the analytics, and the odds makers view these teams very similarly. That's not exactly the case with, the AP or coaches pollsters or people writing college football blogs. It wasn't the case with me in the preseason, where I, along with many others, thought that Utah was going to be way better than Oklahoma State. But Cam Rising, was a little iffy with his health, sat out against Utah State, and Utah State exposed some vulnerabilities about Utah, perhaps, although I think it didn't help that Rising was not playing, and also Utah was probably looking a little bit ahead to Oklahoma State. It's a kind of typical Kyle Whittingham, show up for the games they need to show up in, and sometimes don't play all that well against not so good teams. But anyway, Utah and Oklahoma State are comparable per analytics. You look at ESPN's FPI, who has Utah power rated 17.2 points better than the average college football team. They have Oklahoma State power rated 15 points ahead of the average college football team. And actually, you know what? I think that may have to be reversed. Guys. Let me check that. I don't want to be inaccurate. Me being inaccurate is the last thing that I want to be. I bet you it's supposed to be flipped. Let me see. I bet you it's supposed to be flipped. Oh yeah, those aren't even the correct numbers. My apologies. I think I got the FPI and SP Plus numbers mixed up. Oh well. That's not that big of a deal. I'm very tired, so I'm actually going to stop it right here, but this video will be up tomorrow. Since I have, the edits and everything for it, it'll be up tomorrow afternoon, along with the other preview and prediction videos. Thank you guys, honestly, so much for being on here with me and for providing me with your time. This has been very fun. I'm not going to probably do another 2-hour stream, but I'm still trying to figure out the whole live stream thing. I really am. So, thank you so much for being on, and I will see you guys all very soon. Again, cuts from these videos will be out tomorrow, and there will be deep dives for many of these videos that I talked about, since these are the first being released, which means I have the time to do more research on a lot of these matchups and talk to you about them. So, thank you all so much for watching. I will see you guys very soon. Bye-bye.